If you think HOA drama is just about trash cans and lawn care, think again. Because in my neighborhood, the HOA didn't just send letters or fines. They sent biker thugs to intimidate my wife. But here's the part they never saw coming. Within 3 minutes, those same men were on their knees, begging me to stop. It all started when my wife and I moved into what we thought was our dream home. The neighborhood looked like something out of a magazine. Neat sidewalks, trim hedges, smiling neighbors waving from their porches. But behind that perfect image hid the iron grip of the homeowners association. At first, their control seemed harmless. A reminder about our trash cans being out too long, a note about the length of the grass, even a warning about the color of my wife's flower pots. But with each letter, their tone grew harsher, as though we were criminals for daring to live freely in our own home. When we ignored their nonsense, the fines came rolling in. Hundreds of dollars demanded for things no reasonable person would care about. A leaf blower left in the yard, a garden gnome, even the placement of a mailbox flag. The message was clear: either bend to their rules or be crushed under their power. But when fines didn't break us, the HOA turned to something darker. And that's when my wife's nightmare began. It started with the sound of motorcycles. Loud, aggressive, and out of place in our quiet street. She looked out the window and saw them. Men in leather vests, tattoos covering their arms, cold stares fixed on her every move. They leaned against their bikes across the street, revving their engines, smirking as she tried to water her flowers. She thought maybe it was a coincidence, until the same men showed up again. And again, each time closer, each time more threatening. She was alone when it happened, and by the time I got home, she was shaken to her core. She told me how one had followed her to the mailbox, how another had spat near her feet, how she felt unsafe even stepping outside. I knew instantly this wasn't random. These weren't strangers passing by. This was orchestrated. This was a message. And only one group had a reason to send it: the HOA. They had crossed the line. Letters were one thing. Fines were another. But threatening my wife with biker thugs? That was unforgivable. The next day, I stayed home. And just as I expected, the rumble of motorcycles returned. The men parked their bikes half on my driveway, their engines growling like predators circling prey. My wife pulled back the curtain with trembling hands, fear written all over her face. That was all it took. My blood boiled, my patience snapped, and I knew exactly what I had to do. I stepped outside, calm, silent, but ready. They thought they were here to intimidate me. What they didn't know was that in 3 minutes, their plan would backfire so brutally. They'd be on their knees begging me to stop. And that was only the beginning. Most people would back down when faced with a wall of roaring motorcycles and leather-clad thugs. But I didn't, because I knew something they didn't. When you threaten a man's wife, you awaken a side of him you can never control. And within 3 minutes, those bikers who came to intimidate us were begging me to stop. The moment I stepped out onto the driveway, silence fell between the growl of their engines. They weren't expecting me to confront them. They thought my wife would cower behind the curtains forever, that I would stay quiet and submissive like so many other neighbors had. But they were wrong. I wasn't built to kneel, especially not to cowards hiding behind HOA rules and biker jackets. The first thug sneered, leaning forward on his handlebars, as if revving his engine louder would make me step back. Instead, I walked closer. Step by step, I closed the distance between us until I could see the flicker of doubt in his eyes. He expected fear. What he saw was something else entirely. In that moment, I remembered every petty fine, every threatening letter, every time my wife felt unsafe in her own home. All of that anger boiled together into one unstoppable force. I wasn't about to throw punches. No, I had something much more effective. I reached into my pocket and revealed what they hadn't anticipated: evidence. For weeks, I had been documenting every violation of the HOA's corruption. Photos of board members taking bribes. Emails with threats hidden behind legal language. And now, these bikers standing in front of my house were about to become the last piece of the puzzle. While they grinned and tried to play tough, I calmly lifted my phone and started recording. Their faces, their bikes, their threats, Every second was captured. They realized too late what was happening. They had been sent to scare me, but instead, they had just stepped into the spotlight of undeniable evidence. The leader growled something under his breath and stepped off his bike, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I spoke clearly for the camera, naming the HOA, the harassment, and the thugs they had hired. My voice carried across the street, loud enough for neighbors to hear. Curtains shifted. Doors opened. People were watching. Suddenly, the intimidation turned into exposure. Within minutes, their arrogance cracked. One tried to block my phone. Another tried to mutter excuses. But the more they squirmed, the deeper they dug themselves. They realized that I wasn't just standing my ground. I was dismantling their plan in real time. And with the neighborhood watching, their power was gone. That's when the begging began. They tried to reason with me. They tried to convince me not to post a video, not to call the police, not to destroy their reputation. But it was too late. The damage was already done. The thugs, once so confident, were now on their knees, pleading not out of strength but out of desperation. I didn't touch them. I didn't threaten them. I simply held the truth in my hand, and that was more powerful than any fist could ever be. But here's the thing. As much as those bikers looked defeated, this wasn't the end. Because behind them stood the HOA, pulling the strings. And if you think they were going to take this humiliation quietly, think again. This was only round one. The real battle, the one that would expose just how corrupt, ruthless, and desperate the HOA truly was only just beginning. When you humiliate thugs hired by the HOA, you don't just win a small battle, you start a war. And while those bikers ended up on their knees begging me to stop, the HOA was about to launch their most ruthless attack yet. What they didn't realize was that I was ready to end this game once and for all. The morning after the biker incident, the neighborhood was buzzing. Everyone had seen what happened. Some pretended not to notice, but whispers spread like wildfire. The HOA board, once feared as untouchable enforcers of order, now looked weak. Their intimidation tactic had backfired spectacularly, and they knew it. That evening, I received an official letter. It wasn't just a fine this time. It was a threat of foreclosure. The HOA accused me of creating a public disturbance, filming without consent, and disrupting neighborhood harmony. They demanded thousands of dollars in penalties, claiming they had the authority to seize my property if I refused. But here's where they made their fatal mistake. They thought they still controlled the narrative. What they didn't know was that I had already shared my recordings with trusted contacts, with legal advisors, and with neighbors who were secretly fed up with their tyranny. The HOA thought they were pushing me into a corner, but they were actually walking straight into their own downfall. I gathered every piece of evidence. The threatening letters, the outrageous fines, the bribes I had uncovered, and the footage of the biker intimidation. I compiled it into a case so solid that even the most corrupt board member couldn't wiggle out. And when the HOA scheduled a mandatory community meeting to try and shame me publicly, I knew it was my moment to strike. The hall was packed. Board members sat at the front, smug and confident, ready to tear me apart. They started with accusations, painting me as a troublemaker, a neighbor who didn't respect the rules. But before they could finish, I stood up and projected my evidence on the screen for everyone to see. First came the emails with threats disguised as policy. Gasps filled the room. Then came photos of board members pocketing fines and cash, taken in secret. Murmurs spread through the crowd. And finally, I played the video of the bikers revving their engines, spitting on my driveway, and then begging me to stop once they realized they'd been caught. The room erupted. Neighbors who had been silent for years suddenly found their voices. They shouted. They demanded answers. They turned on the board. What was once a community ruled by fear had just shifted into a community united in anger. The HOA board panicked. Their authority crumbled before their eyes. Some tried to deny, some tried to threaten, but it was useless. The truth was out, and it couldn't be buried again. Within days, a vote was called. The corrupt board members were removed, the bylaws rewritten, and the community finally freed from their grip. And as for the biker thugs, they never showed their faces again. Word spread quickly that their intimidation had backfired, and no one wanted to be part of the HOA's downfall. For the first time in months, My wife stepped outside without fear. She watered her flowers, waved to neighbors, and smiled the way she used to. Peace had returned, but only because we fought back when it mattered most. So here's the lesson. HOAs, bullies, and those who abuse power all rely on silence. They thrive when people bow their heads and comply. But the moment you shine a light on their corruption, they fall apart faster than anyone expects. And if you enjoyed hearing how this story unfolded, don't forget, there are more stories like this, and every one of them will leave you stunned. So hit that subscribe button, join this community, and never miss the next jaw-dropping HOA drama.